To celebrate Maine AEYC's 20th anniversary, we've created a 20th anniversary book. In it, we look back at the past 20 years of early childhood advocacy and professional development, and we look ahead to the future of the field in Maine. We celebrate the people who have made MaineAEYC what it is today, recognize 20 current outstanding leaders in the field, and name 20 young teachers to watch. The book is available for purchase on Amazon beginning January 25th. We hope you'll buy a copy, share it with your program or your local policymakers, and continue to spread the word about the importance of early childhood education. We are so honored to have done this work alongside you for the past 20 years, and we look forward to continuing to improve the lives of children, families, and teachers over the next 20. So if you go to our website, MaineAEYC.org, and head to the 20th anniversary page, you will find a link to order the book on Amazon. We hope you love it. Welcome to another episode of 123 All Ears on Me. I'm Kaylina Mills, and I'll be your host. Today's episode will focus on the 2024 legislative session here in Maine, which has already started. We will be joined by Heather Marden, Co-Executive Director of MaineAEYC and our policy expert, to talk about the bills that are on the table this session that will affect families, children, and childcare teachers. She will also share ways that you can get involved in strengthening our voice to help improve the field through policy. So if you are a family, a parent, an ally, a teacher, a childcare provider, you can raise your voice to help improve the field by advancing these bills. When we return, we will be joined by Heather, who will share everything we need to know heading into this legislative session. 2024 is MaineAEYC's 20th anniversary, and we want to celebrate with all of you. We are planning a variety of events to bring educators together in joyful community across the state. Every 20th anniversary event will be fun, hands-on, and playful, and they will all be free or low cost because you deserve to be celebrated for everything you do for children and families. You deserve to have fun. Our first 20th anniversary celebration is on March 10th at St. Joseph's College in Standish, Maine. Registration is open now, so don't wait. Join us for a lighthearted evening of music and movement with Chrissy Fowler of Belfast Flying Shoes. An early childhood educator herself, Chrissy will lead us in a night of contra dancing and give us a sense of how we could all lead similar activities in the classroom with our young students. This event is free to attend, and all participants will get a 1-hour certificate for elective training in music and movement in the classroom. You get to play, dance, laugh, and connect with each other while earning professional development hours. You can learn more about this event and others at MaineAEYC.org on our 20th anniversary page. Registration is now open for the March event, and space is limited, so register today. MaineAEYC.org/20th-anniversary. That's MaineAEYC.org/20th-anniversary. We can't wait to see you there. Each year, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, also known as NAEYC, coordinates the Week of the Young Child. Childcare programs, elementary schools, AEYC affiliates, businesses, and more all come together to celebrate young children during this week and bring awareness to their unique needs. It is a time to educate your community, local business leaders, policymakers, congressional delegates, and local officials about the importance of early childhood education. In 2024, the Week of the Young Child will take place from April 6th to April 12th, and we here at MaineAEYC want to help you celebrate. We are offering $5,000 in mini grants to help childcare programs and elementary schools cover the costs of hosting a Week of the Young Child event. If you want to host a Week of the Young Child event in your community, you can find the grant application on our website at MaineAEYC.org/events. In the past, our Week of the Young Child mini grants have supported events like parades, town festivals, library events, museum events, concerts, and outdoor play days. Applicants for mini grants can request between $100 and $1,000 for their event. All applications are due by February 23rd, and winners will be announced on February 29th. If you're curious to learn more about the application and what MaineAEYC is looking for, you can also join us for an informational webinar on February 1st. Registration for the webinar and full details about the application can be found on our website at maineaeyc.org/events. So we hope you'll apply for a mini grant and host a Week of the Young Child celebration in your community. We can't wait to hear from you. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we get started, I obviously know you. We work together. And I'm sure a lot of people listening know you, but could you just start by introducing yourself and who you are and what brings you here?
Absolutely. My name is Heather Marden, so I'm the co-executive director for the Maine Association for the Education of Young Children. Prior to this, I was the policy director, so working exclusively in policy and advocacy efforts on behalf of the organization. But prior to that, I did teach in the classroom for 20 years. I've taught in both public schools and private childcare programs, all ages. The only age I haven't done is, the babies. So maybe someday I'll work myself back into the classroom and get to work with the babies.
Awesome. Yeah. So since you are the policy guru for MaineAEYC, you are the best person to talk to find out what is happening now that the legislative session has started for 2024, and what do educators need to be aware of, and what should we be paying attention to. So with that, you are part of the leadership team for the Right from the Start coalition that does a lot of the childcare policy and advocacy. So what is Right from the Start focused on right now?
Yeah, so Right from the Start, is a statewide coalition. We have over, 40 partnership organizations, nonprofits, businesses that work on part of that coalition to help advance early childhood policy. So every year there's kind of priority legislation we focus on. And this year, because it's a shorter legislative session, and I can get into that in a little bit, we're really trying to get the whole bill through that we introduced last legislative session with Senator Troy Jackson. One piece of that bill we did not get through last year, although we certainly got other significant parts, was reimbursing childcare subsidy based on enrollment and not just attendance. So that's something we're hoping to get through this short session that would help some of the business practices of childcare programs as they accept the childcare subsidy program.
And in case someone's listening who's not a provider or doesn't accept subsidy, so they don't understand how it works, what does it mean to reimburse subsidy on enrollment versus attendance?
Yeah, so when families qualify for subsidy, which helps support them paying for childcare, childcare programs, go through work with the state to accept subsidy. And so essentially what will happen, instead of that parent paying the childcare tuition to the program, the state will pay, either all or a portion, depending on that family's income and what their copay might be, directly to the childcare program. So those payments come directly from the state. With the childcare subsidy program, and what I will say is now being called the Childcare Affordability Program. So you might hear me shift to that language throughout this interview. So the Childcare Affordability Program currently pays based on certain parameters of attendance, so that there might be days that a child does not come to the program, that the program will not get the tuition paid for that day. There's certain rules around what's accepted, missed days or absent days, depending on, there's a number of allocated vacation days, sick days, those type of things. So a program has to track all that attendance. What did happen over COVID, because we got some federal funds, is that the state was actually able to take some of those federal funds and reimburse childcare programs for those children on the childcare affordability program, regardless whether child, showed up that day or not, especially with things like COVID and extended illnesses that we saw. This was really helpful for programs because if you have a child out for multiple days, weeks, and you're not getting paid for that slot, you're still paying the light bills, you're still paying the rent, you're still paying your employees to be there, you're still paying, any benefits and overhead costs you have. So to not be paid for that, child slot for that day is really harmful for the childcare business.
So within certain parameters, the basics are that providers don't get paid if a child is absent for a day. Even
Yeah,
though, yeah. So
yeah, there's certain acceptances of absences. So you could hit a point that, for example, one of the things is 50 hours of vacation time. So if a childcare program is closed for 50 hours, they can get paid up to those 50 hours. However, most childcare programs are taking a standard 2 weeks off now of vacation to support their employees, to support their own, I know the program I worked out, it was always, when the deep cleaners would come in and do the carpets and the walls and, really deep clean the centers, they might not be getting paid for that additional week of vacation time that the program might be closed for different reasons.
right. And it's not like someone if could fill that slot for just a day, right? They're not making that income from another student.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
they're holding a spot for someone and not getting paid for it. And so that's kind
Right.
of the issue. And so you want to shift that to just paying people based on the number of children that are enrolled with.
Yeah. Yeah, that spot. And I think, there's some language in there. We talk about enrollment versus attendance. Thinking about what are general private pay practices out in the field, what do our programs charge their private pay families? I think we've seen, a lot of those private pay practices tend to be, you're paying for that slot or opportunity for that child. So whether they're there or not, that is their spot that's held for them. Like you said, there's not a wait list where people just pick up an additional kid for the day. There's a lot of things around information about kids you need. So that would be a hard model to have just a wait list for a day. But if we can get our subsidy payment practices more in line with these private pay families, it's just a better sustainability business model for the childcare programs. It's going to incentivize more programs to accept the childcare affordability program dollars and be able to work with that because it's really hard to budget. And if you think about even things going on like these natural disasters we're having, floods, like extreme weather patterns, like programs are starting to having to close for more things that maybe we hadn't in the past seen happen. Certainly if you're on the water, a childcare on the waterfront in any of our coastal towns, you've been hit pretty hard. Maybe you've been flooded, you've had to close. What does that mean for your business model if you're not getting paid? And during COVID, we saw that childcare programs that maybe had to close down classrooms because COVID was spreading, or even close down their whole building for a period of time, I think some federal rescue dollars did help keep that cost at a minimum to their private pay families, but certainly some of the business operations still required private pay families to pay for that spot. And so, again, because subsidy had some support of federal funds, the subsidy program was also able to do that at that time. But now that program has ended due to the end of those federal support funds.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's a big focus of
Yeah.
legislative session this year. Um,
Mhm.
you also mentioned earlier that the legislative session is shorter for
Yes.
2024. And can you talk about that and why that is?
Yeah, so Maine operates on a biennium, so usually it's really around our budget cycle, our 2-year budget. So when we elect our representatives and our senators into their positions, we elect them for 2 years. So the first year they come in is the long session. That's where all kinds of legislation is introduced, any type of legislation. And that's how legislation gets worked through committees, gets adopted, either into our budgets or funding off the table. And some bills you'll hear are carried over. So that means they didn't make it through the whole process of the long session, or they didn't, die on the table or die in committee, but they got, carried over to the short session, which is happening now. So the legislature will take up that business, those carryover bills, plus a number of limited, what we kind of call emergency bills that are getting introduced as well. So it's not as many new bills that are introduced in the shorter session. There has to be deemed a need or kind of urgency to the bill. So for example, for ours, because it's kind of a carryover piece from a larger bill we were able to pass, there's a sense of urgency to it because it also affects the payment practices of our childcare programs. And we know that childcare is an urgent matter in our state. So that bill was able to get through what we call the Legislative Council, who decides what new bills can be heard this session. So what we're seeing this short session is carryover bills and new, more urgent bills that the Legislative Council have allowed through. So it's not as typically as long, where, a long session might start in December. Last year it went till July. So quite a good chunk of the year it was happening. Typically a shorter session would be shorter. You'd probably wrap up around April is what you expect. However, that just depends on the flow of legislation and how long the legislators need to do their business. It also means we've set our 2-year budget. That's what the larger bill we got passed last year, which included the increases for the wage tier stipend program, the increases for childcare subsidy eligibility, increases for Head Start. So that was a larger bill of ours that passed. That was passed into the 2-year budget. This session, what they would work on is called the supplement budget. So it would be, additions to the budget that was passed last year. So it would be, any other available money that might support programming or different legislation. So you might hear the word supplemental budget thrown around throughout this session as well.
Okay, so the 2-year cycle of our elected officials means first there's a long session when all the new bills are introduced and the budget is passed. And then they get to take a break because we're a volunteer legislature and they need to go work their actual jobs.
Yeah.
And then they come back for a shorter second session to just like wrap up any bills or emergencies that need to be taken care of.
Yes.
That's just okay.
Pretty good gist. Yep. And any supplemental budget that's going to be added on to that biennial budget.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And so like the supplemental budget, does that become part of the standing budget moving forward, or is that just like a one-time thing?
It depends on the different initiatives in the budget. You might have some one-time things in the supplemental budget. You might have some ongoing program, or state business expenses that go. A good example of that would be when we solidified the childcare wage stipend program. That was actually done in the supplemental budget of last legislative session. So that did become, an ongoing budget item. I would say in any budget, there could be a process where things are taken out or proposed to be taken out. So, a budget is always 2 years. It's good when things are in a budget. They're harder to take out once you have them in. But, I would say everything in a budget's always temporary, and you have to make sure it's put in the budget again the following year. So supplemental budgets can certainly include things that we expect would be ongoing state funding.
Gotcha. Okay. So that kind of answers the question that I was going to ask next about how this legislative session is different than previous ones. But is there anything else you want to add? Like for us, for childcare educators, for right from the start, is there anything different about this legislative session than the past ones?
The only thing that would be different is if you are supporting a carryover bill that had a hearing already in the last session. So any bill that's carried over could be in different parts of the legislative process. You could have a carryover bill that had the public hearing last session, and now it's just moving to the committee to decide if they're going to vote on it and pass it out for a House and Senate vote. So in that case, you wouldn't have that hearing again. You would take the results of the hearing from last session, carry that over, and then you might be picking up supporting a bill through the committee work or through the legislature. So your outreach might look a little different. In the case of our priority bill, this one will have a public hearing. So it will be very similar to last session. this bill around enrollment versus attendance would go to the Health and Human Services Committee. Those would be the folks we do the outreach to because we want that committee to pass this bill. That's who we would testify in front of or write our testimony to. And then they would convene as a committee to say, yes, we support this bill going on to the rest of the legislature to vote on, or no, we don't, or maybe there's an amendment they propose. So it's very similar in those pieces. So it just depends on whether you're supporting a carryover bill or not. When we enacted the wage stipends, which was a carryover bill from a long session to short session, we didn't have to go through the public hearing process again. We just had to support it through the rest of the process at that point.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a bunch of things that I know I could participate in, anyone in the public could participate in. And so what should educators, providers, advocates, and allies be preparing for this session to help support the priority bill?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that storytelling piece. So if you are a childcare program and whether your story is you accept subsidy, but here's a hardship when you're not getting reimbursed for all those days that you might a private pay family gives reimbursement for. Maybe your story is I've stopped accepting subsidy or I've limited the amount of spots, for children on subsidy because of these hard payment practices that make it hard to make my budget work. I think preparing those stories that lets legislators know that if you are going to work with families in the childcare affordability program and offer these great opportunities for them and help them do the things they need to do, like get to work and let their child have high quality childcare programming, the business practice has to be better for the childcare program. We know the model of childcare and trying to run a childcare business is almost impossible margins to make that work. So anytime there's a slight loss of potential income that can happen sometimes in these payment practices, it puts providers in a hard position to say, I want to support these families, but if I'm not getting reimbursed, based off a certain rate or a certain number of days their kid is here, I can't make it work, and therefore I can't accept those families. So I think for us, it's really telling the stories so that your legislators understand how it affects you day to day. If you're a parent or a family member, it might be that struggle to find a program that accepts the child care affordability program. We certainly hear that happening, that, hey, I qualify, I just can't find a program that can take me right now. We want to be able to make the payment practices more equitable for childcare programs in comparison to their private pay tuition families, so that there isn't this distinguishing of I can only take 3 children on subsidy, but the rest can be private pay. So if we can make that more equitable between what private pay families are paying and what subsidy is reimbursing in those type of practices, then hopefully we just open up more opportunities for families and they can tell that story about how lack of opportunities hurt them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of like thinking about the story you want to tell, and then getting ready to share that. So you could write testimony,
Yep.
Which you could, I think you can give online, or you
Yep.
can go in person to testify in front of the committee, right?
Absolutely. And so one thing we try to be really good about at MaineAEYC is sharing out information about when you can submit testimony, how to do that. We've in the past even done Google Forms or surveys that let you fill it out and we help you write your testimony. So I, would be hopeful we'll do that again this year to support folks. But if you're looking for testimony, some of the nitty gritty is everything has a legislative document number. We call that an LD, and then it will have a number. This piece of legislation does not have its LD yet. It's sitting in what we call the revisor's office. Those are the folks that have to really look at the language and make sure the language, is legal and written in a specific form. Once it comes out of the revisor's office, it will have a number, an LD number. That's what we'll start referring it to when we share out to the public. And then, the best thing is, really to be, especially if you live in the districts of folks on the committee. So again, it's the Health and Human Services Committee that would hear this bill. You can find the Health and Human Services Committee on the Maine State Legislature website. And we can even share, I think, some of those resources out maybe with this podcast, Kaylina. you can find your legislator and just reach out to them and say, hey, this legislative document's coming out, this bill, and I want you to support it, and here's the reasons why, and that's when you'd share your story. So whether that's in the form of testimony to someone on the committee, which is always helpful, whether it's directly to your own legislators who, would eventually vote on it if it makes it out of committee. Maybe it's your own legislator and you ask them to talk to their friends on the Health and Human Services Committee to ask them to support it. That can always help too. But there's a number of ways you can reach out, even just phone calls, or a lot of our legislators give out their cell phones. Text is becoming a big thing now. So even texting your legislator and saying, hey, please support this LD number. Here's why I live in your district. And here's how I'm connected to it and why I want it to pass. So we certainly will provide resources to help support folks with that. So I would encourage folks to follow us, on our social medias and sign up for our e-news.
Okay. Yeah. So lots of ways and places to share your story. So childcare providers can tell the story of, I can't take subsidy because, or it was really hard for me to continue taking subsidy because. And then parents and families can say, it's been hard for me to find a program that takes subsidy, or, all of those things. So those are kind of the three stories that I'm hearing as like key narratives to help promote the bill.
Yeah, yeah. And I'd say, we always get good support from the business community too, because they understand that need for affordability and availability for their folks that are even working in their organizations or businesses. We did create some hopeful fixes to the subsidy system with the legislation last session. We're waiting for that rulemaking process to go through till we increase subsidy eligibility up to 125% state median income. So certainly those are things that businesses have jumped on board to support, because they want families to be able to afford childcare that work for them, and they also want them, to find that availability. So if there's some hardships, in how subsidy is reimbursed or carried out, then they're very supportive of fixing that for the families, particularly that are working for them.
Right. If parents can't get childcare, they can't go to work, which means businesses don't have employees. So it,
Yeah.
it affects everybody.
It's an economic issue, yes.
So I heard you mention the rulemaking process as you were talking there, and I'm curious to hear more about that. Like, what is this whole process? Because I know some people have reached out to us frustrated that childcare affordability eligibility has not increased yet, because that was passed last June, and went into the budget in July. So they're like, why isn't it happening yet? So what is kind of the whole process from bill to law to actually it happening?
Yeah, and this is where we get really into the weeds, right? Where it does get confusing. So when you pass a bill that becomes law, you do have your law. A lot of laws have to have rules. I think of it in like businesses, you have policies and then you have procedures, right? So your policy is kind of like this overarching you live by, and then your procedure, can change from time to time. So when we pass laws, and then rules have to be made around them. There's some called major substantive rules, some are, minor technical rules. So it depends on what category they fit in. So we are going through the rulemaking process for a lot of the legislation that was passed last session. I'm going to throw another layer of confusion onto this, because when that larger bill was passed last session, it wasn't passed by 2/3 of the legislature. The whole budget wasn't. This law was in that budget, but the budget only passed by a majority of the legislature, which means we then had a 90-day budget. So none of that programming could start, or that money could be allocated until 90 days after the budget was finally signed into law. So it just added another delay, unfortunately. So a lot of the bill programs will fall under the Office of Child and Family Services. So childcare affordability for childcare educators falls under that. The increased in the childcare eligibility from 85% state median income to 125% 125% state median income falls on that as well. So they're creating the rules right now because there was that delay of the 90-day budget. Plus now the rule-making process takes time. So even though the law on the books had started on a certain date, they have to make the rules. Part of that rulemaking process is it has to be vetted again through other offices around just making sure legal language is all there. Then it also has to come out to the public, and the public has an opportunity to do a public comment and say, I love this about the rule. I wish you'd change this about the rule. I don't like this about the rule. And then they have to comment back on all those public comments. So it might be, yes, we had 7 speakers speak about this part of the rule. They would like to change it to this. And it might be a comment back like, yes, we are changing it, or no, we're not changing it this time because. So it's a process. So even though we enact laws, sometimes they don't happen right up front. It does take time for this rulemaking. I am pleased there was a hopeful timeline put out by the Office of Child and Family Services, trying to be really transparent about this and help the field understand what might be coming. So they did give a tentative, hopeful spring timeline for those laws that were enacted for the whole rulemaking process, to get through. So we'll be hopeful of that spring timeline again. That rule doesn't only just sit in the Office of Child and Family Services, it has to go to other offices too. So, it's all about, what we call bureaucracy sometimes and getting through all the things that it has to get through. So it feels confusing, but I always like to think of it, as your policy and procedure, that we have laws and we have rules.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, there's the whole process of how a bill becomes a law. And then there's once it's a law, there's the whole rulemaking process, which can take a year, sometimes 2, for really tricky legislation. Luckily, they're prioritizing our legislation from last year to get it out as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And I think, it always depends too on how much has been put into law, on a certain office or department. So, again, there was that trickiness of a 90 days budget that delayed work that they could be doing on that, where if it had passed as a 2/3 budget and started right away, they could have started quicker on the rulemaking process as well. So again, I know it's hard to wait for. I do appreciate, again, there was, those elements of trying to be transparent and let folks know it is coming. They're not just sitting there twiddling their thumbs, but they are working on it. They also had to hire, a couple key positions in the office to help get that work done too. So I don't, doubt that they're not working hard on it and trying to get that done and getting that out for folks. And also I mentioned there's this whole name change now of childcare subsidy. So everything, kind of a lot of these changes will sit under this bucket of this new program called the Childcare Affordability Program, which essentially was taking out, all the elements of our subsidy program, but implementing these new pieces of it too.
Ooh, all right. That's a lot to just digest.
Yeah. Welcome to the weeds.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you thinking about going back to school to get your early childhood education degree? MaineAEYC and the Office of Child and Family Services wants to make it happen for you. We are proud to facilitate the Teach Scholarship Program so that early childhood educators throughout the state can go back to school to get their associate or bachelor's degree with most expenses covered.
The TEACH program is unique because it's a partnership between you, MaineAEYC, and your employer. Together, we all work to ensure that you can successfully meet your career and educational goals. If you get a TEACH scholarship, MaineAEYC pays for 85% of your tuition costs, your employer pays for 7.5%, and you are only responsible for the remaining 7.5% of your tuition cost. For those seeking their associate degree, that's an average of only $260 per year that you must pay out of pocket.
Exactly, Tony. You can get your degree through the Teach Scholarship Program for very little money and without having to take out loans. It's such a phenomenal program to support early childhood educators throughout Maine. In addition to funding your tuition, TEACH recipients are paid for 2 hours a week of release time so that they can study without losing pay from work or time from their families. The scholarship provides a stipend each term, and the scholarship pays for 85% of your book costs. The scholarship provides so much to its recipients.
And in addition to all of those benefits, Teach Scholarship recipients get one-on-one counseling and support from a Maine AEYC staff member to ensure that they can successfully complete their program.
It's so simple to apply for a Teach Scholarship. Go to MaineAEYC.org/application and download the application to your computer. After that, it should only take about 30 minutes to fill out the form and apply. Again,
that's MaineAEYC.org/application. MaineAEYC.org/application. Apply for a Teach Scholarship today and get back into the classroom to get your degree.
So that's kind of our priority bill. And then also why our priority bills from last year have not necessarily come into being yet.
Yeah.
Are there any other bills that should be on folks' radars that will affect childcare or children or families?
Yeah, one piece I didn't talk a lot about in this priority legislation, there's also a line in there about starting kind of an emergency funding opportunity for childcare programs, so that if your program was going through some sort of financial hardship, again, this would be a law that then they would create rules for, but that there's some funding available to support a childcare program, if a financial hardship was happening, that they maybe could access, maybe a type of grant program or however that would be structured in rules, so that they wouldn't, be closing their doors. We don't want programs because, a boiler blows, and there's no way to avoid fixing that. That maybe could there be some temporary funding there that would support a financial hardship, and that we could help keep those childcare programs operating. Again, knowing that not a lot of childcare programs are able to beef up those savings, nor have that cash flow on hand, or can even endure sometimes taking out high interest loans or those type of things to support when emergency situations pop up.
So is that part of the bill that you were talking about? Okay.
Yeah, and that would be in with this same piece of legislation. So the bill will include enrollment versus attendance, reimbursement for subsidy, and an emergency fund for childcare programs.
Gotcha. Okay. So much can be included in one initiative.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that additional piece. Any other legislation to have on our radars?
Yeah, I think another one that we've been working at MaineAEYC, closely with particularly Head Start programs, is around fingerprinting, and how do we best align fingerprinting across DOE and DHHS, because certainly as we're seeing more public pre-K partnerships grow, sometimes that fingerprinting becomes a barrier, because you have one set you have to do for DOE, one set you have to do for DHHS. Some of it is federal regulatory barriers, but we're hoping through this legislation we can work out how to better align those at the state level too. If I'm going in and I need my DOE and DHHS fingerprinting and background check, I literally have to make 2 appointments at the same place and take up 2 spots. It is also hard to get spots because people are trying to get in and get their fingerprints. So, how would I be able to just go get one spot, put my fingerprints down once, and would they be accepted by both department at that point? So there's some things that will have to be worked out through that, but that's some legislation that, is hopefully going to help us figure out some of those barriers and help us solve some of those problems.
Yeah, that would make everyone's life easier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do put out a caveat: no state has solved this yet. Vermont did pass legislation that a school department could opt in and do all the DHHS background checks, but that was a voluntary program. There's a different level of checks that you have to have under DOE versus DHHS. Again, those are federal regulations, not because of state requirements. So, how to make it easier. We're also looking at folks who work at Child Developmental Services who have their background checks under the DOE system. However, when they come into licensed childcare programs, they're not technically legally fingerprinted under that DHHS system, right? So there's just some weird, unfortunate licensing things going on there that might need to be figured out, since licensing does require the DHHS checks. So it's just a little messy, and can we fix it?
It is interesting too, because I was a public school teacher, but my 2 teaching licenses for the state of Maine included one that was the 081, which is birth through age 5.
Right.
And so that clearly falls into childcare, and yet it's a DOE teaching license.
Right.
So I'm
Yeah.
just now thinking, I'm like, do I need to get another fingerprint? I don't know.
Yeah. And if you're thinking of people working across these two systems, as often, again, we see probably, more frequently with our Head Start partners, but also as we're seeing more public pre-K partnerships arise, and you have now public pre-K teachers that are employed by private childcare programs, but they're sitting under a childcare license under DHHS. They're having to get these multiple checks. And then you start to get into, okay, what's my 5-year, re-fingerprinting schedule. Now I have to go multiple times because I have to do this one every 5 years and this one every 5 years, and just, again, we don't know what that breakdown is of, why you have to book 2 appointments when it's the same scan of fingerprints. Is that an FBI thing that's happening? So, this legislation, I think, can dig into some of that and help us, come out with some answers, or maybe at least research it a little more. I know there's an awareness at the federal level, and I've heard from folks that it's a conversation had, because there is, it essentially does stem overall from a federal level, but there could potentially be things we can work on in the state to, even if it just starts with DOE could accept the DHHS background checks to support some of that, so it's not duplicating efforts.
Yeah, it would save everyone time and money and headaches and
Yeah.
it seems very reasonable to me.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about, it's tough to get those fingerprinting spots sometimes too. It's hard to make those appointments because I know, it's often understaffed at the places where we go to get our fingerprints done too. So I've heard of folks even driving 2 hours and then getting there and the place was closed because no one came in that day. So, we're even having just some hardships in the access of getting those background checks. So hopefully those are conversations we can have through this legislation as well.
Does that one have an LD number yet?
Yeah, it's LD 2107.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I will say the public hearing is on Wednesday, January 24th at 10 a.m. And that will be in the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee.
And is that public hearing accessible on Zoom as well if people can't make it to the State House?
Yes, so you can go on Zoom, and if you go to the main page of the state legislature, there's usually at the bottom of the page where you can put in the LD number, sign up to testify online. And if you want to do it on Zoom or submit written testimony, you can do it right there through those links. And again, I think these are links we can share out too, along with the podcast.
Yeah, I'll definitely put this stuff in the show notes. And if you are subscribed to us in our e-news, you will see it there as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's kind of all of the questions that I had prepared and that came up while you were talking. But is there anything else you want to touch on or make sure people know as we head into this session?
Yeah, I would say if people, if you've never reached out to a legislator before or never participated in a public hearing, or if you're having some angst about how to do this, but you really do want to be involved, please reach out to me. We want to support folks in doing this. We also have folks as part of our leadership program, our LEAP program, that have, now testified many times, that are always willing to help out fellow peers in the field as well. So just don't hesitate to reach out if it's an area where you want to explore and you want your voice to be heard, but maybe you just don't know what those steps are and you would like a little more one-on-one support. We're happy to do that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming and chatting.
Absolutely.
I am excited to see what happens this legislative session. I know last legislative session in 2023, it felt like there was so much energy and momentum around childcare across like all of the state and all kinds of different people. So I hope that we can continue moving things forward to make this system better for everyone.
I totally agree. And and people getting those personal stories out there are really what helps move that needle and keep childcare, not just barriers even, but even successes out there in the public. Sharing those stories of what's working well is also an important piece too. So while we still have more work to do, a lot has also been done. So helping legislators know what's helping you along the way, as well as what barriers still exist that we can help overcome is very important. So keep speaking up and keep sharing.
Yeah, and I always try and remind people when they're feeling frustrated, because a lot of things are frustrating in this industry. But I try and remind people that Maine is really leading the way in a lot of ways on childcare. A lot of the policies that we've adopted and laws we've created in the past several years are the first in the nation.
Absolutely.
So things still need to get better, but they're not as bad as they could be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's always, a nice thing when we can get educators out talking with folks from other states when they start to hear those stories and say, okay, yes, we know we have work to do and this is hard and we don't ever want to undervalue how hard this work is, just because we are doing better than other states. But it is kind of nice to hear that the collective efforts are working and that we are, leading a lot of other states and things like strengthening our subsidy program and building on wages for childcare educators. We're doing programming that, most other states are not doing. So it's great to lead in that way, but also, realize we're also leading from a space that's been significantly undervalued and underfunded for many years. So when you're leading something that's been so undervalued and underfunded, you're not there yet and that you still have a long way to go.
Absolutely. So subscribe to our e-news, follow us on social media, email Heather or I, and we will get our voices heard as a field and as a people for the need to improve childcare.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Heather. Hey, thanks for listening. You've just finished another episode of 123 All Ears on Me, an early childhood education podcast produced by the Maine Association for the Education of Young Children. You can learn more about us at MaineAEYC.org. That's MaineAEYC.org. This episode was recorded, produced, and edited by me, Kaylina Mills. Until next time.